Alright, this week we are going to look at tissues in 101. Last week we looked at different ways that your body will produce ATP as our energy source. So before that we talked about cells, and then we did the ATP, cellular respiration, and now we're looking at tissues. So we're going through the hierarchy, going from atom to cells to tissues, so we're getting a little bit more complex each time. So the first thing that we need to ask is, what is a tissue? And hopefully that one you can come up with yourself, that it's a group of cells that have similar properties and similar functions and jobs in mind. And then we'll also look at what we call the study of tissues, which is histology. Anytime you have that word study of, you know the ending is going to be ology. So histology is the study of tissues. And then major groups or types of tissue, we're going to look at 4 different areas or types of tissue. There are also some other portions or parts that actually help with the formation of cells to tissue. So we have junctions, communication gaps, if you will, that are helping these cells work together. And they're also going to help with transporting things back and forth across membranes. So we have structures like that's shown in the picture here, tight junctions, and it's called tight junctions because they're pretty flush up against each other. And a lot of those are going to help with forming some linings. So if you talk about linings in the respiratory tract or linings within the digestive system. We also have desmosomes, and as you can see in the picture here, this green structure, that is a protein, and it is actually linked together by protein membrane cells here. And then these other structures coming off are some other types of proteins, some intermediate filaments. But we use the term like welding spots and rivets here that are keeping these cells together, cells that are side by side. So you have a lot of those in your outer skin. Then we have those that are called gap junctions, and they're called gap junctions for a reason, because they have these channels or tunnels or tube-like structures that allow the passage of materials through there. A lot of times you're going to find these types of communication gaps and junctions for cells to cells in cardiac muscle. So here's the first type of tissue, epithelial. And so if we just look at the basics of all different types of epithelial tissue, we talk about them being there for covering and lining, especially major areas like major organs and lining cavities inside. It'll talk about them having a basement membrane, so down towards the bottom and the free surface above. Most of the time they're non-vascular, which means no blood flow in that area. They will go through cell division, and in a lot of cases we're talking about mitosis, not meiosis. Meiosis is more for sex cells. Mitosis is for somatic cells or body cells. And since they're covering and lining, these cells are tight to each other. Let's go back one. And we figure out how to name them by how many layers they might have, you know, if they're singular layer or multi-layer, and also their different types of shapes. And so what I've done is I've actually went and got some pictures, some histology slides, and put them on here for you to see. Now, you can do this yourself. Let me show you how easy it is. If you go, and I use Google as a search engine, and what you can do is click on this term images up here, and then you can put epithelial tissue, and then you'll come up with actual histology slides of actual tissue or diagrams of those. Now, if you want to be more specific, you can put histology on here. and that'll weed it out a little bit more. And you can see all the different types here. So you can do that just as easy as I can or your instructor can, and that'll help you practice with what you're looking at. Okay, so here is an epithelial. This is called squamous, and the reason it's called squamous, it's a broad, flat type of cell structure. It's called simple because there's only a single layer, and so material can pass through that pretty easily there. This area here, this is a, notice it says lumen. A lumen is a large opening, so evidently this is for a blood vessel. But all around here, you can see this lining around it. Those are the simple squamous. Now, here, this one's a little bit more pronounced, and you can see it a little bit better, higher magnification. This is what we call cuboidal. Now, it's not a perfect cube structure, but overall, it's got the general cube structure to it. Simple because it's just one singular layer. Notice it says secretes and absorbs. A lot of times we have some of those doing some work with our endocrine system as well. Simple columnar. Now, simple still means one layer. Columnar means they are longer than they are wide, so they're like a column. A lot of times you're going to find the nucleus near the bottom or the basement membrane and more away from the free surface. But these are going to be also involved with being absorptive structures. Here's pseudo-stratified. Now, pseudo means false or fake. Stratified means more than one layer. And so it's giving you this look as if there's more than one layer there. And so you can also see these structures right here. Those are the nuclei that you see in each one of those cells. And then out here, you can see these are cilia structures. Remember, we talked about cilia and flagella back in the cell chapter. They're going to be there to trap particles and also help move things along. So pseudo means false layers of stratified layers. Stratified squamous. Now we're looking at multiple layers again. Squamous means the same as it did with simple, flat and broad types of cells making up this tissue. So you got a lot of layers there that are basically squashed and flat against each other. So sometimes we see that in the skin area. Here's another skin slide. This has got some stratified cuboidal. We saw a simple cuboidal back there, but here you can actually see two layers of cube-shaped cells. Stratified columnar. So stratified again means that we are actually seeing more than one layer. Usually the cube-shaped is deeper and these are longer on top. Transitional. Transitional is just like it talks about. It doesn't look like it's one particular type. Some of these are cuboidal, some of these are elongated out like a columnar, and you're going to find some of those in the bladder, and that's going to help with that mechanical stretching of the bladder. If we're looking at glandular epithelial, we talk about them secreting into the bloodstream, for example, into something else. Those can be things like oil glands, salivary glands, things along that line. Then we have another category or type of tissue, and this one is the one that has the most widest variety, and there's a lot of different types. Connective tissue. It's part of what we call the extracellular matrix, so outside the cell to help it with support. This is going to have blood flow in it, and so it's going to be what we consider, well, most of it will have blood flow. Some won't, but most of it will. So we have a range of whether it's going to have blood or not. Dividing cells, so we're talking about mitosis again as part of it. Here's some different types of cells that are in this tissue category. Fibroblasts. Notice the term blast there, that means building. So they're going to help with fibrinogen. Mast cells are going to release heparin and histamine, so they're going to increase the permeability of tissue. And then macrophages are also in here. Macro means large, and so we're talking about, if you think about things like white blood cells, eating up things that are foreign to the body. Also some fibers within here as well. Collagenous. We talk about that being, like you've heard the term collagen before. Those are a really tough protein material. If it's collagenous, it's more white. Reticular, it's still collagenous, but it's a lot thinner. And then we have the elastic, which is more of a yellow type of tissue. And so elastic has a protein elastin in it, which helps us to be able to stretch, especially like our skin, stretch it and for it to recoil. Here's different types of what we call connective tissue proper, loose versus dense. And when you see the pictures of them in a moment, you can understand why they call them loose versus dense as far as the cells that form the tissue. We have areolar, adipose, and reticular is what we consider the loose tissue, regular, irregular, and elastic, which is more of the dense. And so you can see here, this one on the top, that's an adipose, which is a fat tissue. And we're also looking at areolar and reticular. And you can look and see how wide open basically these cells are that are making up this tissue when you compare them over here to the elastin and the dense fibers over here to the right. So these are all closely together. These are farther apart. You can see that. Specialized connective tissue, this is where we get into some of that variety and function. Over here to the left, this is a cross-section of bone tissue. And so it kind of looks like the rungs of a ladder, these osteons, or these bone cells. And so this excuse me, circular structure here, as it shows, that's considered an osteon or Haversian system. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 or 8 just in this slide alone. There's their central canal. Then we have what we call lacuna, which are like boat-like structures. So you look at bones. This is actually looks more like compact bone. Then we also have blood slides here, or blood tissue, and you've probably seen a picture of this type before. And so all these smaller ones are all red blood cells. Then these larger ones that you see, those are different types of white blood cells. And the white blood cells are classified a lot of times by if they're granular or not, and also what their nucleus looks like. And then up here at the top, this is a picture of cartilage, and that's what these are called, chondrocytes, which are cartilage cells. Okay. Here's another look at the 3 different types of cartilage that we have, and you can see how these bone structure or these cell structures are for those. We also have membranes. You know, we talk about, especially with epithelial, we talk about it being covering and linings, but we do have membranes that are important to connective tissue as well. And between connective tissue and the epithelial tissue and some of the other tissues, these membranes are helping those tissues do the jobs they're supposed to do. So we have serous membranes. That's where they're going to cover and reduce friction from movement back and forth. It's a mucous membrane. A lot of times we're talking about like nasal passageway, for example, respiratory to trap particles. Cutaneous, now we're looking more at covering and skin. And then synovial, we're looking at things like that knee joint, for example. Areas that are going to have a lot of movement involved, hip joints. The other type, or third type of tissue, is muscle. And we put muscle into 3 categories: smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. And there's 2 basic ways that we differentiate these two. We talk about the terms non-striated and striated. And what those terms are referring to are proteins. When you look at a section of muscle, whether you can see these dark bands of protein. If you can, then we consider those striated. And then we also look at whether it's involuntary or voluntary. You know, is it automatic from the autonomic nervous system, or is it more somatic? So smooth, non-striated, involuntary, which means, for example, if you've got food you're swallowing, you don't have to tell your throat to keep it moving down. You got some peristaltic action that gets that food down the throat. So a lot of times we're talking about your basic organs, blood vessels, whether they're constricting or dilating, and skin. Cardiac, you probably already know, that's going to be for the heart. Involuntary, which means we hope we don't have to tell our heart to beat, that it's beating on its own. Striated, you can see those darkened protein bands. And then it has structures in it called intercalated discs, and they actually help support that tissue, those cells that make up the tissue. And then the one that we have in the most majority mass-wise is our skeletal muscle. And we consider that voluntary. You know, when you say, I'm going to stand up and leave the room, you're thinking about that. And also they are striated. And so here's your pictures of those. Here's a smooth muscle. You don't see the bands in them like you do here in these two pictures. This is cardiac, and these little structures right here, those are intercalated discs. Also what you see is these oval structures here, those are nuclei. And then down here, which looks a lot more smoother with these lines, these bands striated, this is skeletal muscle. Okay. And then the last group of tissue is nerve tissue. And when you hear the word neuron, that's just another name for nerve cell. We have glial cells, which are there to help support and help bind nerves to other nerves or nerves to muscle tissue. And hopefully you realize we're going to find those in the brain and the spinal cord. And so they're going to help us with getting nerve impulses around the body. So here's a picture of a nerve cell. This is one nerve cell here. This is a cell body. In the cell body you're going to have a nucleus. This darker structure here is a nucleolus. Then you're going to have an extension that's going to take the nerve impulse away from that cell body. That's the axon. You're also going to have what we call dendrites, and dendrites there are there to pick up incoming information. So whether it's going from one nerve cell to another, or whether it's going to go from one nerve cell to muscle tissue. And this picture up here to the right, it's showing you all these other type of glial cells that are there to help out. We talk about the term oligodendrocyte. That just means those are the ones that are going to be with the central nervous system and producing some myelin. Schwann cells are going to have myelin with them for the rest of the nervous system. Microglia, they're there to help eat up things that shouldn't be around there. And all these other ones are showing you that they're there for basically support, like this astrocyte is helping guide and direct an axon on which direction it should be growing. All right, now there's the going through each slide for today. Not very long presentation, because what you have to do in this one is to make sure you go through and know the differences between each of the four types, but also be able to recognize them when you see them. Another place to go that would be good for you is to go to YouTube and then go into you could put in here Tissues Cons Academy and pull up some basic slides by Cons Academy. And so they'll break it into different areas, but like the one here on 3 types of muscles, that one was a pretty good one that I used in class before that you can use on your own. Okay, so make sure you go in there and take a look at those. You can look at some of the other ones, but I find that Cons Academy works pretty good. All right, that's all we have for today. Like I said, it's a short session, but you've got a lot of studying to do, the 4 basics types, and also looking at histology slides. So until next week, we'll see you then.